Welcome to the roller coaster of midlife. I'm your host, Lucy Q. Now, we all know in midlife that it's not uncommon for aches and pains to surface. Some can come and go, or they can be easily resolved. But what happens when your body's pains and aches have no solution, or that you've been told it's just too complicated? Well, our guest today was told the same thing, but she didn't let that stop her. Rahe embarked. You know what? I shit the bed on that one, Anna. I clicked.
I thought you were doing great.
I clicked and lost my place. And then I thought I stopped at the wrong place. Okay, let me start that again.
That's awesome. I'm with you. You just go.
Okay. Welcome to the roller coaster of midlife. I'm your host, Lucy Q. Now, it's not uncommon in midlife for aches and pains to surface. Most can come and go, or they can be easily resolved. But what happens when your body's pains and aches have no solution? Or you've been told that it's just too complicated? Well, our guest today was told the same, but she didn't let that stop her. Rahe embarked on a transformative journey after professionals from whom she'd sought advice had hit a wall and were left scratching their heads. Anna went on to discover the secret organ, the fascia, that many of us don't even know about, yet it holds so many answers. Not only has she revolutionized her own life, but she's also been the guiding star for many midlife women, including big name celebrities like Lauren Roxburgh and Elizabeth Chambers. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, thank you. It's so nice to be here. Appreciate it.
So let's go back to what you actually went through with pain, your journey to actually discovering what fascia is.
Great. Okay. I tried to make a 25-year journey that was extremely intricate into a 5-minute soundbite. Are you ready?
Sounds good.
I was 18 and I was living in a body that felt like I was 80. And my symptoms were really vast and they were really volatile. So I would have things like I felt so sore during the days that I had done this really, really hard workout, the kind you couldn't take your shirt off over your arms or you can't sit down on the toilet. Your muscles just are so sore, but I wouldn't have done a big fancy workout. I would have digestive issues, kind of like IBS, bubbles in my stomach, having difficulties, and I wouldn't be able to find answers. I'd go and, see doctors and they'd be like, well, you seem fine in your gut health. And I'd do this test and that test. And some of them were more like scary, where I was a dancer and I was athletic and I would go out running regularly through Golden Gate Park. One day I would feel like I'd been training forever. And then the second, third day that I would go out and do the exact same circuit, I felt like a 10-pack-a-day smoker. And it was like this, like such a volatile, like, why is this happening? And why are so many things in my body going wrong? And I had been a Pilates certified teacher through 2 different certifications. I had studied yoga and gotten certified. I'd already done a lot of like body knowledge stuff. And I remember one time I was so desperate, I asked my mentor at the time, what's going on? I don't understand what's happening in my body. And she kind of just put up her hand. She's like, I'm sorry, you live in California. I live in Colorado. You're on your own. And so I just felt really abandoned. And after I started to stop feeling rejected and victimized, I was like, I'm going to figure this out. I can do this. I'm going to just figure out what's wrong with me. And I had taken a couple courses on rolfing in my Pilates certification. And so I knew generally what fascia was. And it was just one time I'm like, it's not muscles. It's not bones. Like I kept like just trying to think through what was happening. I'm like, I wonder if this is fascia. And all of a sudden I kind of tapped into this unknown world of, at the time, 25 years ago, fascia was kind of it's still kind of fringy. Obviously people don't know about it, but it was even more fringy. And it was kind of done by hippie body workers, like manual therapists or massage people. And so it didn't really have a context in terms of what I was doing, which was with motion. And I'm like, I get all of these flare-ups depending upon mostly how I move. And I would actually go see a therapist and I'd have flare-ups in my fascia rather than symptoms calming. And so it all kind of accumulated in this deep quest for finding solutions, what actually calmed them. And that required two different things. One was I had to go in and touch the pain, and it was almost like poking into hardness and like discomfort. And then I would discover that while I was doing that, either pushing into my body on a reformer, I was a Pilates teacher, or pushing into a ball, if I did a certain movement inside my tissues, I would get immediate reprieve. And so I just started chasing the feeling of goodness despite the initial sense of pain, which kind of taught me a really important life lesson of like how to take the things that are hurting us, and with movement and with progress, being able to create motion and forward healing on any level, right? You can apply that same principle. So fascia had this really nice kind of mind-body connection for me that I kind of ended up leading into the work that I created. So I ended up kind of being able to do things that other people weren't talking about in fascia. And I would kind of search the fascia books, but there was something extra. And I'm like, no one's talking about this. And finally, I found a researcher who was doing some, research into the contractile nature of fascia. And for a quick kind of soundbite for the listeners, fascia can contract like a muscle. Okay. And when it contracts is when it sends impulse and releases tension through the system. And so if you can make that contraction on command rather than just like passively through rubbing, like on foam rollers, most people would probably, listeners would know foam rolling, and that's kind of targeted at helping fascia. And so it's kind of a superficial mouthwash kind of equivalent instead of doing your, teeth with a toothpick. If you are working the foam roller, it just is more like kind of, refreshing and hydrating the tissue. Anyway, so you want to be able to do that. And that's what ends up helping your pain and helped me. And as I did that, I started realizing that a lot of the things that we were taught to do with our bodies are really wrong for our bodies. And if you do them from the age of 30, or from the age of like 15 until you're 35, your body is actually being really stressed by the natural, process of living, not just, age itself, but like how we're living and moving in our lives. And when I realized that, I was like, I have to change this. I have to do things that I was taught not to do in order to heal the things that are hurting me. And that was a huge leap of faith, because we're taught to kind of like obey, and you're not a master, you're too young, and or kind of disempower us as women to be like, I know what I'm feeling, I know what my truth is. So that was a big leap of faith, but in the long run, the journey just led me to healing, and I just kept following these little morsels of true in the feeling of goodness.
Can you help us understand what fascia is?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of it, and as I was joking before we got on, I was pronouncing it fascia, and it, in relation to your house. So I know we're all aware we've got our nervous system, we got our muscular system, we got our skeleton, we've got all of this. So what is fascia, and what role does it play in our bodies?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. It's hard to have a conversation when you don't know what you're talking about. So fascia is kind of a generic term for a type of tissue in the body. If you use the term fascia, it's kind of like describing the cotton in a shirt. And if you open up the human body in a dissection, you will see all of this amazing spider web-like stuff. In a cadaver, it looks very dry and kind of crystallized, but in living flesh, we now have like some videos from amazing doctor in France who captured fascia in living tissue with cameras, and it looks like gooey spider webs. And when most of the medical community and anatomical dissections were happening, it looked like superfluous fluff. And so we would tear it away. It almost looks like the stuffing inside of a doll or something, right? It's like everywhere. It's wrapped all over your muscles and your organs, and it's in your eyes and your brain. And so what's changed in the last couple of years is that people are like, well, maybe this stuff isn't like superfluous. Maybe it's actually really important because it's everywhere. And so then we shift our lens to not just what is fascia as a material, but what is fascia as a whole body system. And just like you said, you have your digestive system, you have your endocrine system. And so you have this body system that is called the connective tissue system. And the system comes with its own organs, and they're not massed organs like lungs or heart that are really obvious and like large. They're layered, almost like metamorphosis rock, and they dive in and out and through. It's almost like if you take white paint and then you put a big red dye in it and you stir it, that stream of how the paint moves through the color moves through the paint is almost kind of akin to how fascia wraps in and through the body. So we missed organization of what fascia does. We can kind of identify it based upon other systems. So one of the most common organs of fascia is the myofascia. It's the way fascia organizes around the muscular skeletal system. And then you have the organ of the viscera, which is how fascia organizes around all your like vital organs. And then you have like the interstitium, which is a layer that carries back like kind of backroad fluids, pre-lymph fluids through the body. So you have all these different ways that fascia organizes, and this is what makes it so important. Because itself as a whole system is a energy regulation system. It's how nutrients are delivered to your cells. It's a sonic system. It's a hydration system. It's a communication system. They've just discovered that it has 3 times as many sensors or listening skills as any other tissue. So when you have an internal feeling of hunger, fascia is recording that. When you have the external perspective of something behind you, fascia is recording that, and it's listening and taking all these notes and giving it to the brain. And so when you start looking at, that's why all my symptoms were so varied, is that all of a sudden you're like, oh, my digestion actually is related to my muscular skeletal system. And when I over tighten these muscles, I'm restricting flow and energetic communication through this part of my body. And you'll start to see that it's really kind of this holistic organ. So if you reverse engineer that and you want to fix something, or you have diverse symptoms, you're like, oh, if I go to one source and I fix the fascia, my chances of it fixing a lot of other things is really powerful. And so you can kind of go in and start learning what fascia or the connective tissue system requires to be optimized. And you're taking care of your health in a much more holistic, but simplified way.
Okay, so it's really kind of complicated. It sounds no to
I
me
keep
it
thinking
sounds
I'm getting better at the complicated
no,
part.
not your explanation, but more as an organ itself. It sounds like it's as you were describing, it sort of flows in that red dye in the paint. It kind of comes in and out and it flows. So how my fascia might work may be different than yours. And that's why you had all of those problems. Whereas we could have lived the exact same lifestyle. You have the problems and I don't.
Yes, that is true. There's different types of connective tissue and different ways that they express. And mostly in women, they tend to be a little more sensitive in their systems because fascia is very responsive to hormones. And so it tends to be a little bit more influential on women than men. But that's not always the case. But yes, in general, there's different things. But a more accurate way of maybe saying that is that what one woman might experience as like muscular skeletal pain or fibromyalgia might seriously be related to fascia, but another person would experience it as chronic headaches and depression because their body metabolizes and understands and relates to their fascia differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so everybody is affected by it.
That's where I was going to go next,
sorry.
because because I've seen a lot of women as they hit their midlife years, when guess what, all of our hormones are changing, they start having these autoimmune problems.
That's right.
And doctors are basically, oh, I don't know, it's autoimmune. And the women are literally left stranded.
With no answers. That's right.
Yeah. I have one friend who gets these awful blister-like patches on her skin.
Interesting.
And I'm like, everything is telling me it's hormonal based. She goes, yeah, my doctor said it's autoimmune and he doesn't have any answers. I'm like, well, that's not very nice. And I think
not helpful.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of women are, is because there is so little understanding about our hormones and how they truly affect our body when it comes to something like fascia.
Yeah.
It's an even bigger head scratcher. It's because true. There's so little understanding around that.
I think so. I think that we're coming a long way with female, medicine. and how women operate. I mean, look, we just got our right to vote over 100 years ago. So it's like, we're doing pretty good. We're making some progress. But I think,
and then some rights are taken away. So,
yeah, I mean, people are told that it's complicated, and hormones are kind of complicated, right? That's why there's a lot of, I mean, we just have to be realistic. It's not that we can't figure it out, but hormones are, it's kind of, I try to simplify this for people. Like there's the chemistry set, and then you have physics. And it's like, which is more influential, right? The chemical set or the physics? Is it chemistry or physics? And they work synonymously. But in my experience, and this is where fascia comes in, it's actually the physics that is more potent than the chemistry, because chemistry is rarely altered, right? Unless it's like biologically programmed. But you can actually change your chemistry through the physical things that you do. And so women tend to like not go in and be as physical in their later years. And that really changes the actual production of those chemicals and how they flow and how they're delivered and how they're being secreted, like the glands of your endocrine system. That affects neurotransmitters. And so without going into the big, you know, kind of sciencey aspect, for I think women in midlife, it's almost like, what's happening to me? And what used to not happen is now happening. I mean, did it take you a long time to figure out your own menstrual cycle growing up? Like every year, I was like, I mean, every month, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm having my
no,
period.
mine up until I started having kids. I was on the pill for a while too, so that kind of stabilizes it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I went off the pill not long after we got married, and it was a few years before we decided to have kids. But I was always bang on.
And you
Like
knew it was coming. Like you knew how to like, I was
28
never
days.
off schedule. Most women are on schedule, but they don't feel the symptoms. They're always somehow surprised. They're like, why is my low back hurting? And then it's like,
No,
oh, that's funny.
my body was very tuned into that.
Oh, that's
But
great.
having said that, um when it was in my late 30s, mid 30s, I had a tubal ligation. I knew I had two kids, didn't want to have any more.
Mhm.
And I was shocked at how that affected my body. It
Interesting.
was no more, and the doctors thought I was crazy. They used to cut and tie they literally used to tie your tubes. When I had it done, they have these like clamps, similar to like those hair grips that you put in.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They put those on,
Ah,
and I woke up and basically my body was trying to reject them.
wow.
Yeah. And
Wow.
I know people that had it and they sell through it fine. My body was, get this out of me. And I
That's
could literally feel them in my body. And I told the doctor this, and she's like, no, you can't. And I said, I'm going to point to my body and you tell me if I'm wrong.
good for you.
And then she's like, I don't know what to tell you. It took me a year and a half to get over that, for my body to get used to it.
Oh, you
And
left them in.
yeah, I wasn't going back through any more health.
Okay. I've had people that have actually gone back and like had things removed because they had that interoception sensitivity, which is like I can
Yeah.
sense things
I
inside of
didn't
me.
I didn't think it was an option.
Oh, interesting.
I'd also had two C-sections at that point,
Okay.
and it was
Okay.
just like that part of my body had had enough trauma.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
But it wasn't until then, it was after that that my hormones, I didn't realize it was the early symptoms of perimenopause, because we're not
Oh,
told this. But
that's
my
right.
menstrual cycle changed dramatically.
That's interesting. That seems early. So you were in your late 30s.
Yeah. And that was when my periods became ridiculously heavy, to the point where for 24 hours I was afraid to leave the house.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then it wasn't
So much.
until, well, when was I put on, finally clued in and started getting shit sorted out, was um a year ago. I think I've been on hormones for about a year.
Okay. That's
And
great.
I look back and I'm like, my body could have used, and my body, I went through that whole weight transformation too,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
because again, it was attributed to the hormones. But
Interesting.
also, you hear women say, I kept working out like I used to, and it didn't make a bit of difference. I kept gaining weight, and it was just like, you get to the point where you're like, well, why bother?
Why bother? It's so interesting. I actually have a client that I was thinking of while you were talking, and she's now been doing GST for probably close to 12 or 15 years. But when she came in, she was right at the beginning of her 50s, and she, same, like, just like she was, really into keeping her body and really working out hard. And then just, she kept doing the same things, but her body kept doing things different. She's like, wait, this used to work and I don't have an answer. And this used to, and all of a sudden she also was like, I can't do these workouts because my shoulders can't do this, or my low back is not da da da. And she'd like gain, weight in her legs. And she was like, I can't put on the boots that I bought that were $5,000 or whatever. Like,
Yep.
Number one, your first problem is don't buy boots like that.
Don't buy $5,000 boots.
The other thing is we can fix that. And I think that that's really what's interesting, is that fascia is the regulator actually of total body metabolism. Okay. So it's like your body's smart grid. In its greatest facility, it is your body's smart grid. And it's the reason why, like, your lungs beat next to your heart without interruption, right? Your heart puts off your EKG, electrocardiogram, and then your lungs are doing this energetic cellular thing. And it's the best kind of example. And it regulates total body hormones. And as you get older, your body becomes less metabolically active. And what that means is that even if you have the hormones that are supporting your body, there might not be being delivered as well. With the tissue, when your fascia gets hard and meshed and like crystallized, they've started finding research that unhealthy fascia is related to metastasis of cancers, that it literally is like this like web that is protecting and isolating the parts that are valuable and like kind of holding the shape, but also the boundary of parts of your body. And so a lot of times we think of metabolism way up here and like the how many calories can I burn? And that's like the embers off the fire rather than the actual deep flame inside the log. And so fascia is regulating on a deeper level of metabolic process. And so when women get to that place, it's almost like you have to go deeper into the physiology to stoke metabolic process. And because fascia is your energetic smart grid, it's regulating all 8 of your metabolic processes. And so inside of that, working with fascia can actually help to stabilize and create some normalcy for the other parts of our bodies as we age.
Okay, so you mentioned GST. I'm just wondering if you can share with our audience what GST is, because for my Canadian listeners, that's one of our taxes.
It's goods and sales tax.
Which is not what you're talking about.
That is not what I'm talking about. And everyone asks me, how did you get the name GST? If I did it over, I would have done it differently.
So yeah, if you could share what GST is and how we can keep our fascia healthy or sort of reinvigorated if we think that we're, not exactly an optimal level there.
That's great. Yes. So GST stands for grid flow somatic technology. Fascia being the grid of your body that's regulating everything. It actually is 70% water, and it has to stay in a fluid state in order for it to be healthy. And the technology is this stuff that I created after 25 years of how do you restore, because mine at 18 was so probably genetically, I had trauma, was so compromised that it wasn't enough to just take care of it. It was like I had to restore it. And so you can go as deep or as superficial. For most people, just getting the necessary feed of information to the tissue is enough to keep you pretty healthy. And the way that you would look at this is like fluid dynamics, another branch of science, but it's a simple image of a syringe. When your body, when you want to move, fascia works off of hydraulics. When you push the syringe, water comes out. When you pull the syringe, it draws the water in, and it's like this pumping action. Your body is more tubes than sticks. And we think about exercise and motion in this like stick kind of like levers and pulleys, but really it's more like this pumping action that has volume. And so your body has been created to move with a series of compressions, pushing the syringe and pulling the syringe, or an accordion is another image for listeners. And so we need to do these movements regularly throughout our day, not just a workout, not just 30 minutes of taking care. It's like you need to be able to microdose your fascia into this kind of hydraulic state throughout your day. So the way you first think about it is most people are really sedentary. So the one I teach people, the first is traction. Traction is the pulling of the syringe back. Compression is the pushing of the syringe in. And so I tell people, like, when you're waiting for your coffee to percolate every morning, take your hands on the edge of your kitchen sink, put your toes right against the baseboards, and sit back and pull your spine and hang off your kitchen sink like you're hanging off of a jungle gym. This takes your vertebra, this takes fascia, because fascia is wrapped like tubes around all of your organs. They're not layered like I said spider webs, which feels very flat, but they're actually tubular in their structures on a microscopic level. And so when you traction, you're starting to be able to pull, and it pulls the vertebra, and it's decompressive, and it helps to create suspension and lift in the body. That's the antidote for gravity, right? The aging and the wear and tear of gravity. And then I have people go into compression, which is like dropping all the way to the floor into a primal squat, you know, when you see Neanderthals around a fire and they're like squatting. These kind of movements that are really compressive. We think about compression as bad on joints, but actually compression on soft tissue spreads joints and actually alleviates the tension on joints as we age. So we go between traction, hanging off of things, and then compressing and like bringing your knees in if you're lying on your back, being able to lay on the floor. We do this in the actual like movement and exercise portions of GST, but throughout your life, you want to kind of be looking for like your life as a jungle gym. When you're going to fill your car at the gas station, have your window down and pull off unless it's winter in Canada. Don't do that. Chain link fences, parking meters, handicap ramps. You start to look around for places to stretch, traction, and compress. And you go from long shapes to short shapes. Long shapes is almost like this taffy-like kind of pull and push. And then the other thing that we teach is that you need to be able to create rotation, because rotation is like a chicken, rotisserie chicken on a skewer. Your spine is the skewer and your tissues are kind of like that chicken that's rotating around it. And rotation has both compression on one side and lengthening and traction on the other. So the way that I describe it to people to understand is that if you hand wash your sweater in a tub of water, you dunk the sweater and all the fibers get loose. That's compression. You pick up the sweater and all the water is dripping off the fibers, and that's traction. And then you wring it out with your hands, and it takes all the impurities and starts to stretch it and actually tone the fascia correctly. And so if you can do those three things daily, what you'll start to notice is, and throughout your day, is that there's a fascia reflex, like the thirst for the thirst for drinking, or the instinct for food. Fascia wants to move, but most of us are so sedimentary in our lifestyles, sedentary and sitting, that we don't have that reflex like dogs that get up and do the downward dog after sleeping, right? That's a fascial reflex to move energy through your body. If you can do these little things like hanging off your sink, number one, you start to be addicted to the feeling of this opening. Traction is so yummy, it hits you with endorphins rather than adrenaline. Hormones, right? These differences of what we're dousing our bodies with. We need to turn off the adrenaline and start working more in that endorphin system to be able to stay de-stressed, to have homeostasis in the body. And so that kind of tractioning does that. It elicits that physics, elicits the chemical reaction of ease on the body. And that's really important for women because of what we've been talking about. So that's the basic principle of like, do three things, microdose it through your day, and start to crave that feeling so that your body is like listening. Because I think the biggest thing about aging is like really getting true to yourself, right? Knowing what's true for you. I was in your story, it was so beautiful to be like, I told doctor, I can feel this, and she didn't believe me. And I'm like, how many women know something is true and they're just not taught to say it's true? They're taught to doubt they're true. And so I like to talk about the body as like this divining rod. Back in the day when you made farms up in Canada, they'd hire someone to come out and like hold this like electromagnetic pole and decide where the living water was. I don't know how true the science is, it's still up for debate, but the truth is that your body, being 70% water, and fascia as your organ of consciousness, is telling your true, is reading, is feeding you the information of like, this is right, this is wrong. And in your main life, in midlife, it's like, you have to be your health advocate. Your friend needs to go to her doctor and be like, this is not right. I want you to go deeper. she needs to take responsibility to go to an internist or like a integrative medicine doctor or but she would only do that if she was learning to listen and believe the divining rod of her body. And so that's kind of the overarching passion of what fascia can do for a woman in midlife, is it like really connects you in, and then you have something to make choices from what is true for you.
Yeah. And I think, ultimately there's a certain confidence that comes in midlife where we do learn to speak our truths and, stand up for ourselves and say, no, this is how my body works. And I know with male bodies, they can be more similar. Guys' bodies typically kind of all work the same, whereas women, no, we're all beautiful different souls. And at the end of the day, you are the person that knows your body the best because you are the one living in it.
That's right. That's so right. And I love that. That's it. That's the truth.
Yeah. So, and that's why, I have conversations like we're having right now, is so that somebody listening can go, okay, wait a second, I'm not crazy. And it's going to inspire them to either have that conversation with their doctor or do their own research and dive in deeper and find out the solutions that are right for them. Because what's right for me, what's right for you isn't right for the next woman. And I think ultimately, I think that's how we support each other on the journey, is we all share our knowledge. You see where you can tap in and learn, and then you move forward.
Totally. That's a really great conclusion.
Now, Anna, as we wrap up, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with our listeners?
I don't know. You just did such a beautiful job. Yeah, I guess, I want to encourage the listener to have courage to live embodied. Yes. To love who they are, to connect more deeply to themselves as the source of their truth. And one of the beautiful things about fascia is that it's really a connector. And as it connects, it also is the thing that expands consciousness. It's the more healthy that your fascia is, and this translates into our mindset, into our emotions, into our vital living as women, that the more open that we can become, the more stretched, the more expansive we can become, the more connected, the more powerful we become, and the more we can take journeys and be of service and have true purpose, which I think is what, back to what we were talking about in the beginning of the conversation. You had mentioned that you started the podcast because your son was leaving college, and you're like, what am I, I'm a mom. And you step into midlife and you're like, okay, now what? We're told all the way up to this point that this is what life looks like, but now there's all this possibility, and it can either be scary or it can be like super empowering. And so I feel like that having an anchor of being embodied in who you are, stretching your fascia, stretching and getting up and out and like lifting the burden, expands your consciousness, expands who you are. And then you can actually find and step courageously into that purpose, that greater purpose.
I love it. That was beautiful. Beautiful. Now, to connect with Anna and learn more about GSD Body, make sure you check out the show notes. I will have all of the links in there. Now, my goal for the roller coaster of midlife is to empower women like you to thrive in this amazing chapter of our lives. So go on, embrace the adventure, and start rocking midlife like the badass that you know that you are. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends, because our greatest gift is in our community. Now, don't forget to visit my website, therollercoasterpodcast.com, and click on Start Here and get your free audio course, 3 steps to go from hot mess to badass and start rocking midlife. I'd like to thank you, my listeners, for choosing to join us. And Anna, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
And until next time, keep riding the roller coaster and embracing the adventure of midlife.
Ride. Roller coaster.